This is The Metro, broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor. I'm Tia Graham. This hour on The Metro will journey loss, grief, advocacy, and hope, and the state of Black maternal health in this country. In her honor, Detroit is part of a 3-day event using art, storytelling, remembrance, and action to honor the mother's loss to maternal complications. Tonight, the Detroit Institute of Arts will host a screening of the documentary Aftershock to kick off the series. The film follows stories of loss, grief, and advocacy for Black and brown mothers who have died from pregnancy-related complications. Omari Maynard is a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, and advocate. Maynard is featured in Aftershock, and audiences will follow along as Maynard reshapes his life after the death of his partner, Shamony Gibson, just 13 days after the birth of her son. Through grief and loss, Maynard created portraits of remembrance for Black and brown women lost to a lack of support and resources in the maternal health system. One portrait turned into dozens, and this spring, the portraits were on display in Washington in front of 50 congressional offices, giving a name, a face, and a story to alarming statistics. Danielle Atkinson is the founding executive director of Mothering Justice, a grassroots advocacy organization empowering mothers, particularly mothers of color, to address the critical issues that impact their families and communities. And Omari Maynard is a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, advocate, and the co-founder of the ARIA Foundation. Thank you so much. Both join me right now in studio to talk a little bit more about the 3-day series. Danielle and Omari, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, definitely.
Of course. So Omari, we talked a little bit before. You described Shamony as a connector. She was a hairstylist, a dancer. She ran a business alongside you, and a mother of 2. So who was she?
So in addition to all of that, she was just, an amazing person. She was hilarious. She's funny, foodie, unapologetically, sloppy eater, but a really good person. She was really like instrumental in the community in terms of like being able to connect, intergenerationally, like. A lot of the work that she did, especially, as she got older, she would like style hair for the elders, in like their homes, specifically in their homes, but then also nursing homes, and also, like I said, she also worked at the police athletic league, so she was very connected to, the young folks, and teaching them how to dance and what performance art was, and, finding confidence in themselves, So she was definitely that person in the community that, could connect with a lot of different people, understood the value of conversation and communication, and, just really was a stand for family, yeah.
In October of 2019, just 13 days after the birth of your son, Shamony Gibson died due to postpartum complications. And you state that there was never a sense of urgency among the healthcare system. And for you understanding those statistics about Black maternal mortality, what was going through your mind during those 13 days, especially knowing those statistics?
To be honest, I thought we were good.
Yeah.
I thought we were covered. And we were covered. And I thought that there wouldn't be any real, alarming or, permanent issues. During that time, again, because of the work that, she did and also her mother, Shamony Gibson, did in community around reproductive justice and reproductive health. We had a doula, we had a midwife, we also had a team of other just friends and family who happened to be midwives and doulas. The hospital that we gave birth at, we had the direct line for, the head of the labor and delivery, sector. So it wasn't like we were just calling the hospital. We were like texting her, so like And it's interesting because even having those personal connections, and the information that she was giving us just wasn't aligned, in hindsight with what we really needed. A lot of it was, she probably needs some rest. She probably needs to just relax, just let her stay home and, just chill out and, give her support. And we were doing that. And that's very important during postpartum. However, when you are having the signs and symptoms that we were describing to her, like shortness of breath and getting it hard to walk up the steps and, those type of symptoms, they're directly connected to, blood clots, and this is, again, something that I've learned hindsight, but as a professional, as somebody that we know to be a doctor and, knows what the signs and symptoms are, we do what a lot of people do, which is, adhere to what the professionals are saying.
Exactly.
So that's what we did, but we did it in good faith and thinking that this was the best thing to do. But when it all came down to it, it was not. And, we ended up, losing her because of it.
And one of the things, because I watched the film Aftershock, one of the things that stood out to me was the constant back and forth of, are you sure she's not on drugs? Or are you sure she's not? Those type of questions that weren't helping the situation at hand. When you were in that situation once again, and, you're in a hospital that's underfunded in the first place, of course, the anger and all the other feelings were rushing over you, but did you feel in that moment that you were powerless?
Yeah, so to give some context, Shamony was complaining she had shortness of breath, but, so what we did was we made sure that, she was covered. So during those 2 or 3 days, we had family and friends come over to the house, hang out with us, bring food, chill out. And, that night she was like, my chest really hurts. I need to go to the hospital. So as I was packing her stuff up to go to the hospital, she went into cardiac arrest. And after she went into cardiac arrest and we called the ambulance came. They were asking if she was on any drugs. And then, the fire department came. They asked if she was on any drugs. Then, I don't even know, EMS specialists. There was just a bunch of people coming in asking the same questions, And, for us, we live in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And, the house that I live in, my great-grandparents bought that house in the 40s, and now it's a multi-million-dollar home, and even though that, they wouldn't know this, just coming into the home. But the assumption, is that she was on drugs and that, we're black and brown folks, and that we're in Bed-Stuy and that we're doing things that are not conducive to, good health, and support. And that just wasn't the case, but when it all came down to it, because it's, it's an emergency situation, we're just trying to get her out of here. We're just telling them, listen, this is what you need to do. This is where we need to go. And unfortunately, the way the system was set up is that we gave birth at a specific hospital that was maybe about 2 miles away, but the closest hospital is probably 1.5 miles away. And they're supposed to go to the closest hospital. And fortunately, the closest hospital to us, again, has been divested from, for years. And the thing is that Bed-Stuy has been gentrified and become a community where there is a lot of money, where there is a lot of things going on. But we talked about infrastructure the other day. And, even though there are people moving in and their businesses moving in, school systems still aren't that great. The hospitals still aren't that great. The infrastructure, in order to have a conducive community that creates healthy situations, is not the same for everybody. It's there, but it's just not the same for everybody, So, and that was a very glaring. It was a very glaring situation to kind of be in real time. When we got to the hospital, like you said, it's been divested from. She had a blood clot that was moving through her body, and they just didn't have the tools. Or supplies in order to pop the blood clot. So what they did was just gave her blood thinners and we just prayed, And unfortunately, they couldn't transfer her until she was able to breathe on her own. And, we waited and unfortunately that time never came, So she ended up, again, transitioning about 12 hours, after we got to the hospital.
This is the Metro. I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about the maternal health crisis Black mothers are facing right now across the country, and in particular in Detroit. My guests are artist Omari Maynard, whose portrait series in her honor will be on display this week in Detroit, and Danielle Atkinson of Mothering Justice. Danielle, listening to everything we just heard Omari say, him describing his situation in 2019 in October with Shamony, the data in Michigan tells us of a similar story of neglect. Black women in this state are nearly 3 times as likely to die from childbirth than their white counterparts, with the majority of those deaths classified as preventable. What does preventable actually mean?
Yeah, preventable means that we have the means and the knowledge to address these either before, during, or after a crisis. But for a number of reasons, including implicit bias, lack of supplies, and not listening to women, unfortunately, they do pass. And, every time Omari speaks about Shamony, I learn something new about her, and I learn something new about their story. And unfortunately, it's going to take this kind of intimate interaction with this kind of loss for there to be momentum and understanding of what preventable means, not only on a definition level, but a visceral, I understand preventable, and preventable is unacceptable.
So what's failing right now that is, leading to these preventable deaths?
Yeah, there's a number of things that we can do on a hospital level, on an interpersonal level, and then on a policy level. First, we need to believe women, right? We need to believe birthing people when they say they're in pain, when they say this is not normal for me, when they say I don't understand and I want more of an explanation. When we understand that and we really internalize the need for listening to birthing people, half of the battle right there, right? Because then we are addressing the needs that are being told to us by the person who's in that position. Then we need to surround birthing people, particularly Black mothers, with the resources and see this problem as not only an issue with having a baby in a hospital, but do you have adequate childcare so that you can go to your prenatal visits? Do you have transportation? Are we listening to you about your relationships? Are we facilitating the relationships that are going to be there for when you have a problem? Are we providing resources as far as money, and not asking questions and not making you jump through a million hoops to get those resources? And so those are the things. And then also your system, right? Like, as a person who is in the sandwich generation, birthing people have a particular amount of challenges and things that they need to do. So are we making sure that all of the systems of care are working interconnectedly, and that people are covered so that the stressors are less, and so that we can see the forest beyond the trees, if you don't mind the metaphor.
Oh, love the metaphor. Love the metaphor. Now, Danielle, according to Data-Driven Detroit, in 2024, there were roughly 7,200 births in Detroit, with roughly 70% of those identifying as Black. Out of those 70% of Black births, 39% received less than adequate care. That's about a quarter higher than the rate in the state of Michigan. What do those numbers tell us about what we're facing right now?
Well, first of all, Data-Driven Detroit, let's give a shout out to local data, right?
Yes.
That is so incredibly important. We know that this, organization is focused on equity, and that drives the research, which drives the conversations that facilitate change. So Data-Driven Detroit, shout out. And then what those numbers really tell us is, when you have a concentration of Black women, Black birthing people, there are specific issues that you need to address. Wherever we see that concentration throughout the country, we're seeing these disparities. So, race, right? We can't ignore it. The CDC doesn't ignore it. It is science that we have to be paying attention to. So when we're talking about this, we need to specifically talk about how Black women are faring when they go into these institutions and when they're a part of a system. One part of the conversation we're going to have tonight is really pulling back the layers of systemic, right? We hear that word said so much, but what does it mean when you have good people in a system and how their actions are changed or what they have to do? What does it mean when you are put into a system? So those are the things that we really need to break down. And I think the numbers really show that. And anecdotally, I gave birth. My first daughter was born in Detroit, and I've walked, hand in hand with people through the birthing process in Detroit and postpartum. I could tell you some stories, right?
Danielle, that is actually one of my questions to you. But before then, what is less than adequate care? How do we define that?
So every person deserves to come out of a birth feeling blissful. And it's possible, right? I have felt that feeling. People have, they're like, oh, pregnancy, birth, you can have a blissful experience, meaning that you are surrounded by people who care about you. You are listened to. You have all the resources you need, and you feel like you're thriving in your new parenthood, right? And so less than adequate is anything that's not that, right? The wait times, the frustration, the lack of means and things that you need, just feeling disconnected and just without. And I've also experienced that. And you can hear it in the stories of women who have had bad outcomes. And, unfortunately, well, I don't know how to really phrase this, but we're talking about death, but there's also having a horrible pregnancy. There's also having a lot of harm happen to you when you are pregnant and birthing. And that also is a huge story. And those stories are where the answers and the solutions live.
Before we go to break and bring Omari back into this conversation, you brought it up, but you are a mom.
Yeah.
Have your own birth shaped the way you view the U.S. maternal health system?
Yeah, they really have. So like I said, my first daughter was born at Hutzel. My second daughter was born at a birthing center attached to a hospital. And then my last four were born at home. And so I've had a variety of providers, and each one has been amazing in a different way. But with home births, and that is something we advocate for, but it's not the only thing we advocate for, is a midwifery model of care puts a birthing person in the driver's seat. You are less reliant on the test to tell you how you're doing, and you have to internalize how you're doing, because a midwife is coming to you with, how are you feeling? I'm like, oh, there's no test to tell you. You are literally asking me, and this is important for you to understand as a provider. So I think that was like the first step in being a parent and trusting my own instincts and knowing my own body, because when I have that baby, all I got is my instincts, right? And I have to trust that and know what the cues are and all of those things. So for me, a midwifery model of care really set me up for how I needed to parent and how I needed to take care of my own body.
This is The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. My guests are Omari Maynard, a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, and advocate, and Danielle Atkinson, executive director of Mothering Justice. When we return, we'll learn more about the new normal Omari created for his family and the brotherhood he found with fathers who've experienced loss. You all stay right there. This is The Metro. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guests are artist Omari Maynard, whose portrait series in her honor will be on display this week in Detroit. Danielle Atkinson is the founding executive director of Mothering Justice. We're talking about a 3-day event series in her honor, Detroit, and tonight kicks off the series with a screening of the documentary film Aftershock at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Doors open at 6 p.m. Now, Omari, you state that Shamony was your muse and was the reason you picked up a brush in the first place. After Shamony transitioned, when did you begin painting?
Like the time right after she passed. Oh man.
Did it take a little time for you to?
Probably like maybe a couple weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks. I don't even know. But what I do know is that, all right, so yeah, it was a couple of weeks because, all right, so storyline, right? So October 6th, she ended up transitioning. And this is why, like, I know that I'm doing what I need to be doing, like, and there's a purpose for it all. Excuse me. So she transitioned October 6th. We had to find, a time to bury her, of course, and have the, the funeral and all that great stuff. And there was a specific pastor that we wanted to have, and the only time that we could get him and get a date for getting him and then also burying her was October 11th. And October 11th is my birthday. So I turned 38 that day. And it was just like, again, like this glaring thing of her being like, listen, one, can I curse on this?
No,
show?
you cannot. No cursing. No cursing.
I'm sorry. One is like, I'm not leaving you, like, and more importantly, you're not leaving me, and, we still have work to do, in all of this. There's still co-parenting. There's still partnership in business. There's still partnership, throughout this whole journey of, telling my story, telling your story, telling our story. There's that. And sometimes you need those huge slaps in the face to keep you directed, focused, in line, understanding what, the end game and what the goal is. And, so shortly after that, of course, like, there was a lot going on. We just buried her. And I started painting, and the things I started painting was pretty much her. So I painted probably about 4 or 5 pictures of her between, like, October and December. So December 9th is her birthday, and we had an event called Aftershock on her birthday to bring the community together. And you will see it in the film. This is like how the film begins. To tell the story of who she was, but more specifically, how she passed, why she passed, and what we need to do as a community to make sure that this doesn't happen, to our women, anymore, or at least at this rate. So like I said, I probably painted about 4 or 5 pictures during that time of just really being the only thing I could do. Taking care of the kids and trying to figure out what life was going to be like. And, all these very high level things and immediate things were just it was hard, like my mind wasn't there. But having an opportunity to paint and be by myself and transmute my feelings, my emotions, into art and focusing on something that, one, allows me to spend time by myself, 2, allows me to be outside of my head so that I can really think about the things that I don't have words for, and also, more importantly, use my other intelligences, right? And then 3, it was really like having a space to understand that family, community can step in and will step in, when it's time for it. So like that time period of those 2 months really set the stage for me to understand all those things, in addition to the power of art and healing and what growth looks like even through struggle and pain. So that was what I was on. So by the time December rolled around, I had a bunch of artwork that I created of her. We had the Aftershock event. It went really well, and then it set this path for us meeting Paula Eisel, who was the director of Aftershock, to then put us on a different type of journey. And then after that is when I created another picture of her. It was like, make another one. Like, I heard her in my head, like, make another picture of me. Why not? Like, sorry. Like, dag, I got a whole bunch of these portraits already. Why am I going to make another one? But I did. And that was the origin of the In Her Honor series. So yeah, it was. And by that point, I started meeting other men, and meeting other families, and started speaking about, her loss and, Like I said, this was like really kind of the table setting of Aria Foundation, of In Her Honor, of the Luxor Collective, all kind of happening all simultaneously.
So we're going to break all of that down a little bit because, you talked about that community and folks outside of your family circle that are important to have and to build and to pull from when you are in a situation where you feel like it's all just too heavy. Talk about the brotherhood that you were able to find, unfortunately, through the grief and loss of Shamony.
Yeah, so when she passed, her story was pretty big on social media.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, in addition to sending condolences and all that great stuff that we all needed, a couple of men reached out to me as well, to just say, like, listen, like, similar situation happened to me and my family, and we lost our partner, and I just want to, just say I'm sorry for your loss, and if you need somebody to speak to, this is my information. Two brothers in particular, Charles Johnson and Mustafa Shabazz, reached out to me, and I took their their I guess olive branch very seriously and called them.
Yes.
Called them, and we had very deep conversations for hours. And again, I don't even know what these guys look like. I've never met these guys and don't know who they were, but also had an opportunity to really pour my heart out to them and ask questions that I couldn't talk to my mother about, my brother about, like my close family and friends about, because they just wouldn't understand. I really didn't have the specific answers that I needed, and having those conversations with them was a very, it's, one of those core memories that I have and take now, because that really showed me, like, oh, one, I'm not in this alone. And then also, two, like, I can talk to men about intimate feelings and thoughts and dark thoughts and high vibrational thoughts and all of it. There's space for all of it, basically. And I knew that I wanted to pay that forward. So, shortly after Shamony transitioned, about 6 months later, Amber Isaac Rose transitioned. And, her partner, Bruce McIntyre, was, Omari Maynard 6 months ago. Yeah. And, like I said, wanted to pay that forward. So I reached out to him. And, same type of vibe. We started chopping it up and, built this very strong connection. And then, asked him if he wanted to be a part of the film, and kind of, telling his story and the advocacy work that he was doing, because that was kind of really the most important piece. You can have people to talk to, which is extremely important. But if somebody transitions, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is what you want to do and this is the work that you want to, lean into. But, he was kind of on that same wave. So, yeah, man, we built a very strong connection. He was in the film, and, he's doing his, shout out to Save a Rose. He's doing amazing things, building a birth center out in the Bronx, just really raising awareness around maternal health and fatherhood. And, we've been kind of, tight ever since. Yeah.
This is The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about the maternal health crisis facing Black mothers in Detroit and across the country. My guests are artist Omari Maynard, whose portrait series In Her Honor will be on display this week in Detroit, and Danielle Atkinson of Mothering Justice. Now, we're talking about fatherhood, of course, and Omari, you said that, Shamony is still very much alive in your family, very much alive. Where do your kids feel her the most?
Man, that's a good question. Where do they feel her the most? I guess in their heart. It's very interesting because Anari, that's my daughter. My daughter's 9 now, but she is very much so like Shamony in terms of like understanding family unit and family dynamics, and wanting to mother both me and Kari.
Yeah.
But she talks about her mom all the time, specifically like the time that she had, even though it was 2.5 years. Yeah. Those times are very much so present with her today. And now, and with Kari, it's it's really dope because, they are, it's like like Aria is essentially their little, sister, so like as we are moving in this space of reproductive health and reproductive justice and building this foundation of this organization, they're watching it, they're there, in it, so like when I'm doing my Luxor, groups and doing my men's sessions, they're sitting right next to me, when, we have events specifically, especially in New York, they're there, when, we're meeting people and building, our community, like they know who Danielle is, they know who Charles is, they know, Charles's kids, Langston and Charles, and they know Elias, Bruce's son. Yeah. So like it is very much so like this, family community that holds high reverence for me, but also covers them and is really guiding them in terms of understanding like the framework of morals and ethos and community and all those things, so and this is all built because of Shamony, so her presence and the results of her presence is very much so entangled in their life and their experience. Mm-hmm.
I love that you call the foundation like their little sibling, or their sibling, because they're growing up with it as it's growing and it's evolving. And then as you're evolving, you're all just growing and evolving together. If you can, talk a little bit about how fatherhood has changed for you. The traditional idea of what fatherhood looks like is just simply not your reality anymore. So how did your view of fatherhood change after Shamony transitioned?
Yeah, so when Shamony transitioned, before Shamony transitioned, excuse me, it was very much so like, she was always an entrepreneur, so she was at home. I was teaching at the time. And, my mindset was, I'm getting the consistent checks. We have to have health insurance. We have to do certain things. So, and her thing was like, quit your job, like, and let's do this art thing. And it's going to work because it's going to work, and more flexibility with time, more time to be spent with the children, all the things that come with being an entrepreneur and having the access of your 24 hours.
Yes.
And I didn't understand that, so like it was extremely traditional in terms of like, I'm gonna go to work, you stay home with the kids. When I get back from work, you do your entrepreneurship life and all of that. And like, she was totally against it. She actually hated that idea because it's like, how can I stay home when I got business to do, So eventually, if she would have still been here, that would have definitely changed. But like I said, it was more traditional. And after she transitioned, it was just this very real thing. It's like, all right, well, I've got 2 very young children. I'm on a teacher's salary. I'm working 8 to 3. They've got to be somewhere. I've got to pay for daycare and stuff like that. By the time I pay for daycare, I might have $500 left over to pay for everything else. This is not going to work, so, and also like, I need to figure out a way to be able to make this money, spend time with my children, create a space for me to really mentally be back to who I am. Like you said, figure out this, parenting thing I'm going to say by myself because, without, the support of, my partner. But as all those things are happening, and COVID is horrible.
Yeah.
But like I said, she transitioned on October 6, 2019. We went into the pandemic March 2020, so this is like 3-4 months, 5 months later. And because the pandemic happens and everything shut down, it gave me an opportunity to really be able to think. And as the world slowed down, I had an opportunity to slow down and really figure things out. So it really gave us the opportunity to do the film, to build the organization, to figure out, how I was going to create space for myself and my children, and to transition out of teaching.
Yeah.
In addition to that, so many things that happened that at the time was horrible, but also for right now they were gifts.
Yeah.
And one of those gifts was, working as a teacher, we had to get vaccinated, and if you didn't get vaccinated, you would lose your teacher license. And at the time, I was trying to figure out what I was doing, what I wanted to do, and how I was going to do it. And I think that push, in order to get vaccinated or just have my license terminated, was for me that push that I needed to be like, all right, this is something I could free myself from, and then just kind of really have plan A or plan A, So that's what that was. So I just leaned into the art, leaned into the advocacy, leaned into the organization building, and, been leaning in ever since.
And she's right there with you the whole way. I love that. Danielle, bringing you into this conversation, how often does fatherhood and loss come up within the work that you do with Mothering Justice?
Yeah, I think this was, so I met Shamony's mother through a mutual friend, 3 years ago. And it was just, like a little matchmaking. You two are doing similar work and you're cool people, you need to meet. So we met, and I knew her before I knew of Aftershock and all, and Omari, obviously. And so in my researching before I meet this person I don't know, I looked her up and I saw Aftershock, and I want to say that was a turning point for Mothering Justice, of saying okay, there is a different dynamic that we should be leaning into, that we should be looking at. And then talking to Omari, I told him, I don't know if you remember that text, but I said, you know what, you make me rethink giving men a microphone. The intentionality and the devotion that Omari expressed around how do we support birthing people, particularly Black mothers, was okay. Let me listen some more, and so that was definitely the time that we said, okay, now how do we do this, and how do we do it the way that Mothering Justice does it, right? And it's about handing the microphone to the person most affected. And so we've started different endeavors, including a father fellowship that looks a little bit but is different than our Momavist fellowship, led by men. And we ask them to be in a wise counsel to advise us, because we are not men, and we don't know how you think, work, live, love, and want to engage in this work. And so really being intentional about saying, this is a different thing than what we're doing. It's not just the other parent, it's different dynamics. And how do we ask you to advocate and step into this space using your authentic voice and story?
I mean, Omari, and just watching Aftershock, learning more about Omari and his story, and Shamony and the story, it's often overlooked, the male role within the space, the loss that men encounter when we do see Black maternal deaths. So we are going to come back to that after this break, but this is The Metro. My guests are Omari Maynard, a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, and advocate, and Danielle Atkinson, executive director of Mothering Justice. Coming up next, what's being done in Lansing and in the government to combat the Black maternal health crisis, and what it looks like on the ground if laws were passed in support of birthing moms and their families. You all stay right there. We'll be right back. This is The Metro. This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. My guests are artist Omari Maynard, whose portrait series in her honor will be on display this week in Detroit, and Danielle Atkinson is the founding executive director of Mothering Justice. We're talking about a 3-day event series in her honor, Detroit, And tonight kicks off the series with a screening of the documentary film Aftershock at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Doors open at 6 p.m. Now, Omari, the advancement of reproductive innovative health through artistry and healing. Did I get that right?
Close.
Close.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we've been going over this for a while now, and every single time I say it wrong, I'm going to try it. The Aria Foundation.
Aria.
Oh. The Aria Foundation, which was founded in 2019, just a few months after Shamony transitioned. Now, the goal is to mitigate the lasting impact of systemic racism and oppression on the sexual, reproductive health, and birth outcomes within underserved communities. Let's talk about it for a little bit. You all work under 3 pillars: innovation, healing, and activism. What propelled you to get started with the foundation?
Yeah, so the ARIA Foundation, it stands for the Advancement of Reproductive Innovation through Artistry and Healing. And so why we started it was, one, because of, to raise awareness around maternal health and reproductive health. But specifically, why do we choose this, artistic and innovative lens was because, we all come from a family of artists, both Shamony and I. Shawnee is an author, she's a writer, she's a dancer, she does a lot of things. Shamony, like I said, was a dancer and a hairstylist, and just a huge pillar in the community. And myself, I'm an artist. My uncle Leo, he's an artist. My uncle George and Uncle Leo, they were both photographers. So this was kind of very much so in our wheelhouse. And more importantly, like in addition, not even really more importantly, but in addition to that, art creates a different world when it comes to telling stories and community and and how people digest information. Like we can talk about maternal health crisis, so we can talk about anything, with words, until we're blue in the face. But it's a different thing, to be able to see an image or to be able to put yourself, in a painting or photograph or, or film, and to tell a story in that manner. Like it creates a different type of awareness. And it also, has more, it can have more of a long lasting effect. A lot of us remember, specific songs and specific times, but we can't remember the text that we read in, high school, exactly. 20 years ago or whenever you're in high school, So, we understood that, and we wanted to make sure that, in this maternal health space that, we use that opportunity to raise awareness and drive what we're doing as a foundation, but also to help support what everybody else is doing, So that's how Aria, came about, So in addition to In Her Honor, which is the portrait series that we're going to be showing at the Detroit Institute of Art and also at Mother and Justice, we have the Luxor Collective, which is the support group that I have for the men. We have Remembering You, Remembering Us, which is a support group for families. We're creating... we have a global project with an organization in Bali, Indonesia, Bumi Sehat. We're creating curriculum around their indigenous birth practices in order to bring back to the States so that, families are supported in a different way, in a more holistic way. And then we also started the Postpartum Awareness Week, which is creating a week right before Mother's Day to raise awareness about all things postpartum, because that's where we're losing most of our families, most of our women. And we have a collective called Speak, Move, Change, which is a collective of women, a collective of community leaders that was started by 3 women who lost their daughters due to the maternal health crisis. So Shamony Gibson, Mama Odin, Tasha Odin French, Tasha Odin French's mother, and Shalon Irvin. So, being able to create these different structures under the ARIA Foundation gives us an opportunity to, create different avenues, to be able to have this type of conversation, but more importantly, to really start identifying safety nets that we need in order for us to raise awareness, as well as doing it in a way that's cool and innovative and, supportive and digestible. But, again, creating space for more opportunities to happen outside of just people who've been affected and people who know what the issues are, and then, of course, connecting with Mothering Justice, which is super important. And I'm learning so much about it in terms of having all these initiatives, which are great. But if there's no policy, if there's no legislation around, and if there's nothing that's going to really help community in a way that is supported by, law, then, what are we doing?
What are we really doing? And I love that you bring that up, because Danielle, alongside the Congressional Mama's Caucus, Mothering Justice helped put these portraits outside the offices of more than 50 members of Congress this spring. Whose idea was that, and why office doors instead of a gallery?
Me. It was my idea. Yay. Yes, the idea was that lawmakers are people. We tend to forget that. And people have hearts. And these particular people have power. So we wanted to appeal to their hearts. We wanted to link them with an honoree, a woman that they had to look at coming in and coming out of their office, and put that charge. Like, it's not enough to just continue to co-sponsor the Momnibus bill. We need innovation. We need you to organize within the halls of Congress. We need you to carry these stories impactfully throughout your day and in your power.
Mm-hmm. And Danielle, in a collaborative effort, the portraits were placed once again in front of those congressional offices. Did anyone engage? What happened?
Yeah, we've had a lot of engagement. So starting out, we asked Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib to start the Congressional Mama's Caucus, and this was one of the first projects of the CMC. And she was having trouble. I would call her and I'd be like, "How many people are going to host these portraits?" And she's like, "I'm getting no one." She would be on the floor. She, we all know Rashida. She's an organizer. She had hand cards describing the portraits and in her honor, and handing them out and begging people. And she would, we'd call her and she'd be like, "I think I've got 5 people. I think I've got 6 people." By the time we got there and we started placing them, we would get calls and she's like, "Another Congress member wants one. Another Congress member wants them." So much so that we had to make a poster that they could also display, because people were like, "Well, why don't I have one?" And so this, so we did that the first year, and the second year we got more interest, and we're still getting these calls, and that just speaks to, right? It speaks to a lot of things, but the thing that I'm gonna point to is it speaks to the power of art in telling a story and conveying a need.
And Danielle, because we're getting down to the wire here, briefly, if you can, just talk about the event itself, number one, the event series. So tonight we do have the screening of Aftershock and the Afterglow as well after. But there are other things that are happening. So fill us in.
Yeah, everybody who knows Mothering Justice knows we do too much. But tonight, Wednesday, August 26th, from 6 to 10, we'll be at the DIA, specifically the DFT, the film theater attached to the DIA, seeing Aftershock and then having a talk back with Shamony and Omari. So please come out. Don't miss it. It's going to be really great. Yeah. And then tomorrow we have a night in her honor, and that's going to be at the Detroit versus Everyone flagship in Eastern Market. That's from 6 to 11. It is a ticketed event, so please go on the website and buy a ticket. So we can pay for this food, but all the portraits will be there. We will have live entertainment. It will be really great fellowship, an opportunity to dress up and give these women the honor that they deserve. And then the portraits will be moving down the street to the Mothering Justice office. Again, details are on the website. From 9 till 5, 10 till 5, you can just anybody can stop by Mothering Justice, and you can see all of them and talk to Omari.
Yes, super exciting to see that this is happening in the city of Detroit. Danielle Atkinson is the founding executive director of Mothering Justice. Omari Maynard is a Brooklyn-based artist, educator, and advocate. Tonight kicks off the 3-day event series in her honor, Detroit, with a screening and afterglow of the documentary film Aftershock. And Aftershock is streaming on Hulu right now. I want to say thank you to both of you for being here with me today.
Thanks so much for talking about this, Tia.
Yes.
Of course. That's it for The Metro. The Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and me, Tia Graham. It's produced by Sam Corey and Alex McLennan. Our engineer is Jose Yanes, and our senior producer is David Lyons. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. You all have a great day.